My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 41 years old, a nurse by profession, and until a few months ago, I thought I had married into a family that would one day become my own. I was wrong. When I first met Claire Morgan, she swept into my life like a gust of warm wind. She was beautiful, sharp-tongued, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had always been taken care of. Her family was old Orlando money, big homes with columns, country club memberships, and the kind of quiet arrogance that came from never having to look at a bill twice. I, on the other hand, came from simpler stock. My parents ran a small diner down in Ocala, and I was the first in my family to even attend college. Nursing wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and I liked helping people. I thought Claire admired that about me. In the early days, she said she did. But once I married her, it became clear that the Morgan family, her mother Eleanor, her brother Scott, even her cousins, looked at me as though I were the hired help who had accidentally found his way to their dinner table. Only one person treated me with kindness and respect. Richard Morgan, Claire's father. Richard was different. He was a tall man with a calm presence, the kind of person who could silence a room just by standing in it. He had built his fortune the old-fashioned way: real estate, warehouses, careful investments, and unlike his wife and children, he hadn't grown arrogant with it. He worked hard, believed in loyalty, and more than once told me, "Daniel, don't ever let them make you feel small. Money doesn't make character. It only shows it." Over the years, Richard and I grew close. When he learned I worked 12-hour shifts, he'd sometimes call me just to check in. When Claire and I fought, as we often did, he'd listen without judgment. He had a quiet strength that reminded me of my own father. I didn't know then that this bond would become the very thing Eleanor and Scott despised most about me. Time, however, has a cruel way of unraveling things. Richard grew sick. First it was fatigue, then trouble breathing, and soon after, the doctors confirmed it, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He didn't have long. Claire cried the first day, but after that, she turned cold. She visited her father less and less, preferring weekend trips with friends over hospital rooms. Eleanor buried herself in charity luncheons, and Scott was too busy showing off his new luxury car collection to sit with the man who had built his empire. So it fell to me. I rearranged my shifts, sometimes working nights so I could spend afternoons at the hospital with Richard. I brought him his favorite coffee, read him the paper, and we'd sit in silence when the pain was too much. He'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "Thank you, son." It was during those final weeks that Richard began speaking more about his estate. He didn't give details, but he made it clear he wanted fairness. He talked about setting up scholarships for underprivileged kids, about making sure everyone was looked after, including you, Daniel. His words caught me off guard, but I didn't question them. I thought he was simply grateful for the care. The night before he passed, I was sitting beside him when he turned his head, his voice hoarse but steady. "Don't let them take what's yours," he said. His hand gripped mine with surprising strength. "They'll try. Don't let them." At the time, I didn't know what he meant. I just nodded, tears stinging my eyes. The next morning, he was gone. The funeral was a grand affair. Black limousines, white roses, and speeches about legacy. Eleanor played the role of grieving widow, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, while Scott shook hands with businessmen like it was a networking event. Claire stayed close to her cousins, laughing softly at something one of them whispered, as though her father's coffin wasn't 10 feet away. I stood alone. The outsider. The nurse. When the time came for the will to be read, I told myself not to expect much. Richard's wealth was his family's business, not mine. Still, part of me hoped he had left something small in recognition of the bond we shared. A token. A gesture. The Morgans gathered in a mahogany-paneled office at their attorney's firm. Eleanor sat at the head of the long table, her diamonds catching the light, while Scott scrolled on his phone. Claire avoided my eyes. The attorney, a gray-haired man named Mr. Bennett, cleared his throat and began. The first will was dated in March. It was clear and generous, splitting the estate between Eleanor, Claire, and Scott, with notable amounts set aside for charities and, to my shock, a personal bequest to me, $3.5 million, designated for his loyalty, compassion, and care. My chest tightened. I hadn't expected that. Richard had thought of me. But then Mr. Bennett pulled out another document, dated September, only weeks before Richard's death. This will was different. The charities were gone. My name was gone. The estate was divided entirely between Eleanor and Scott. Claire, too, was cut out, though Eleanor quickly reassured her, "Don't worry, darling, we'll take care of you." The room tilted. I felt the air leave my lungs. Richard's words echoed in my head, "Don't let them take what's yours." Eleanor's lips curved into the faintest smile as her eyes flicked toward me. A smile that said, "You never belonged here anyway." I sat frozen while Scott smirked and whispered something to Claire that made her laugh nervously. My hands curled into fists beneath the table. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about betrayal. About how they had erased me as if I had never mattered. Not even to the man who had called me son. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, one thing became clear. I wasn't going to let this go. Not quietly. Not ever. The night after the will reading, I barely slept. My mind replayed every moment of Richard's final weeks, every word he spoke to me, every look Eleanor gave me across that polished table. Betrayal had a taste. It was bitter, metallic, like blood in the mouth. Claire stirred beside me, her back turned, her breathing shallow and restless. We hadn't spoken much since the will was read. She hadn't defended me, hadn't even defended herself. She just sat there, watching her mother and brother claim everything while her father's last words to me thundered in my skull. The next morning, over coffee, I tried to open the conversation. "Claire," I said quietly, "you saw what happened yesterday. You know that isn't right." She didn't meet my eyes. She stirred her coffee with unnecessary force, the spoon clinking against the porcelain. "Daniel, my father wasn't himself those last months. Maybe he just changed his mind." Changed his mind. My voice cracked, sharper than I intended. "Claire, he loved you. He loved me. He would never cut us both out completely. You think he suddenly decided Eleanor and Scott deserved everything?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't know him as well as you think." That stung. After all those nights by his bedside, after all the times Richard had called me son, she could say that? My chest burned. "I'm going to contest the will," I said finally. That made her look at me, eyes wide with something between fear and disgust. "Daniel, don't. Please. You'll only make things worse. My mother. She'll destroy you. She has connections, influence. You can't win." I leaned back, staring at her like she was a stranger. "So you'd rather I just roll over and let them erase me?" "Erase you?" Her silence told me everything. She wasn't on my side. Not anymore. The following week, I met Angela Brooks. She was a probate lawyer recommended by a colleague at the hospital, and from the moment she shook my hand, I knew she wasn't someone Eleanor could easily intimidate. Mid-40s, sharp features, and a voice that cut through nonsense like a scalpel. I laid everything out, Richard's decline, the two wills, his last words, Eleanor's smug smile at the reading. Angela listened carefully, jotting notes. When I finished, she tapped her pen against her notepad. "This smells like undue influence. Classic case. Elderly man, declining health, suddenly revises his will drastically in favor of the most controlling family members? Courts see this all the time. The question is, can we prove it?" "I don't care how hard it is," I said. "I want to fight." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good. Because Eleanor Morgan doesn't play small. If you go up against her, she'll try to bury you. But if you're willing to get your hands dirty, so am I." That was the beginning. Angela and her team started digging. They subpoenaed Richard's medical records, interviewed nurses from the hospital, requested drafts of earlier wills. I spent evenings after my shifts combing through financial documents Richard had once shared with me, piecing together timelines. Soon, cracks appeared. The March will, the one that had included me and the charities, was consistent with how Richard had spoken about his legacy for years. The September will, however, had been drafted under suspicious circumstances. The attorney who prepared it was a young associate in Eleanor's circle of friends, not Richard's longtime counsel. Hospital logs revealed Richard had been heavily sedated the day he supposedly signed it. And then there were the emails. Angela's paralegal uncovered a string of exchanges between Eleanor and Scott from around that time. Lines like, "Once this is finalized, we'll have full control." And don't let Dad see the March draft again. He'll change his mind if Daniel's around. Reading those words made my stomach twist. It wasn't just greed. It was strategy. Cold, calculated theft of a dying man's wishes. When Angela slid the printed emails across her desk toward me, I sat in stunned silence. They planned this, I whispered. Yes, she said. And the court will want to know why. At home, the tension between Claire and me only grew. She saw me collecting files, meeting with Angela, preparing for depositions. One night she finally snapped. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Do you really want to drag my family's name through court?" "Your family did this," I shot back. "Not me. They cheated you out of your inheritance, too, Claire. Don't you care?" She looked at me with something like pity. "My mother will never lose. Don't you understand that? She'll twist everything, and in the end, you'll be left with nothing but debt and humiliation." Her words cut, but instead of discouraging me, they hardened my resolve. I realized Claire wasn't afraid of her mother losing. She was afraid of her mother winning at my expense, and her being caught in the middle. "Then I'll face her," I said. "But I won't back down." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "You don't know what you're doing, Daniel." Then she left the room. Weeks turned into months. The Morgans launched their own offensive. Their lawyers filed motion after motion to dismiss my case, painting me as a manipulator who had cozied up to Richard for financial gain. They hinted I had influenced him to write me into the March will, even implying that my presence at the hospital was self-serving. Scott was worse. He paraded around town, buying new cars, throwing parties, and making sure the local gossip columns mentioned the Morgan fortune that was now secured for the rightful heirs. He even showed up at the hospital once, mocking me in front of colleagues. "Still playing nurse?" he sneered. "You should have known better than to think Dad would give you a piece of the pie. Stick to bedpans, Daniel. It suits you." I clenched my jaw, said nothing, but inside I burned. Angela kept me focused. "Let them bluster," she said. "What matters is evidence. And we're building a wall they won't be able to climb." The breakthrough came when she discovered Richard had left me a voicemail 3 days before his death. I hadn't noticed it before. It was buried in my phone, unheard. Angela urged me to check, and when I finally played it, Richard's raspy voice filled the room. "Daniel. It's late, but I needed to say this. They're pressuring me. Eleanor, Scott. They want me to change things. I don't feel right about it. Don't let them undo what I wanted. Promise me." I sat there, phone trembling in my hand, tears streaming down my face. Richard had known. He had tried to warn me. Angela leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "That voicemail? It's dynamite. With medical records, the emails, and this recording, we can paint a clear picture of coercion. Eleanor and Scott won't walk away clean from this." The first hearing was tense. Eleanor sat in her black tailored suit, a mask of dignity, while Scott lounged beside her with a smirk. Claire sat further down the bench, wringing her hands, unable to look at me. Angela spoke with precision, laying out the grounds for contesting the will. The judge listened, expression unreadable, but when she mentioned the voicemail, Eleanor's face blanched ever so slightly. Scott's smirk faltered. The judge scheduled a full trial. Eleanor's attorney approached Angela afterward with a settlement offer. $700,000 to drop the case. Angela turned to me. "Your call." I didn't hesitate. No deal. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about justice. About keeping the promise I'd made to Richard in those final hours. And about making Eleanor and Scott pay. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish. Every step I took down those marble halls echoed too loudly, as if the whole building wanted to remind me I didn't belong. Eleanor did. She glided through the doors like she owned them, her heels clicking a steady rhythm of control, Scott swaggering 2 steps behind her like a crown prince. Me. I carried a folder of documents and the weight of Richard's last words pressing against my chest. Angela walked beside me, calm as a surgeon before an operation. "Don't look at them," she whispered. "Look at the judge. Every word, every answer, address him. Not Eleanor, not her attack dog lawyer. You're not here to fight them, you're here to show the court the truth." The bailiff called our case. Morgan Estate dispute. My stomach knotted. The first day of testimony was brutal. Eleanor's lawyer, a sleek man with a smile too white to be sincere, came after me hard. He painted me as a parasite, a man who had latched onto Richard in his weakest years. You were not related by blood, correct? No. And yet you spent an unusual amount of time at his bedside? I was there because he asked me to be. He smirked. Or perhaps because you stood to gain financially? Angela objected. Sustained. But the damage lingered in the judge's eyes, in the murmurs that rippled through the gallery. Scott testified next. He spun tales of a father disappointed in me, a man annoyed by my constant hovering. He swore Richard told him he regretted ever including me in his will. Watching him lie under oath with such ease made my fists itch. Then Eleanor took the stand. Dignified, soft-spoken, her voice dripping with grief. She said she had only wanted to honor Richard's true wishes. She claimed the march will had been influenced by my persistent presence, that Richard had confided in her privately, desperate to correct his mistake before it was too late. It was a performance. And the worst part? She was good at it. When court adjourned that day, I sat on the courthouse steps, head in my hands. Angela lit a cigarette, her one vice, and exhaled slowly. They came out swinging, she said. We expected that. Tomorrow it's our turn. Do you think the judge believes them? I asked quietly. Angela gave me a sidelong glance. He believes whoever has the better evidence. And we've got plenty. Let them enjoy their little performance while it lasts. I wanted to believe her, but inside doubt gnawed. The next day was ours. Angela called Richard's longtime nurse to the stand, a woman named Linda who had worked the night shifts during his last 6 months. Her testimony shifted the air in the courtroom. Mr. Morgan was heavily medicated that week, she said firmly. I remember because Eleanor insisted he be given extra doses of sedatives. He was barely coherent most evenings. There's no way he could have fully understood complex documents like a will. Angela handed her a chart. Can you confirm the medication levels on September 14th, the date he allegedly signed the new will? Linda nodded. Yes. He was on morphine every 4 hours. At those doses, he would have been confused, drowsy, and in no condition to make life-changing decisions. I watched Eleanor's face. For the first time, a flicker of unease cracked through her composure. Then came the emails. Angela projected them on a screen, one after another, the damning words glowing for everyone to read. Once this is finalized, we'll have full control. Don't let Dad see the March draft again. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Scott shifted uncomfortably, avoiding the judge's gaze. Eleanor sat frozen, her jaw tight. Finally, Angela played the voicemail. Richard's voice, weak, trembling, filled the silent room. Daniel, it's late, but I needed to say this. They're pressuring me. Eleanor, Scott, they want me to change things. I don't feel right about it. Don't let them undo what I wanted. Promise me. I closed my eyes as his words echoed. The room seemed to hold its breath. When the recording ended, the silence was louder than any argument. The judge looked at Eleanor's lawyer. Your witness. But for the first time, the man had no clever smile. He stammered a weak objection, claiming the voicemail was taken out of context. Nobody in that courtroom believed him. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone. Claire hadn't come to court. She hadn't asked how it went. When she finally walked in, she tossed her purse on the counter and avoided my eyes. I heard the voicemail, she said flatly. I looked up. From who? My mother. My heart sank. Eleanor was still in her ear. And what did you think? I asked carefully. She hesitated, then shook her head. It sounded like he was confused. Weak. Maybe he didn't know what he was saying. Claire. My voice broke. That was your father begging for help. He trusted me to protect his wishes. And you'd rather believe your mother. She didn't answer. She just walked past me, disappearing into the bedroom. The distance between us felt unbridgeable. The trial stretched on for weeks. Witnesses clashed, lawyers sparred, The media feasted on the drama of the Morgan family tearing itself apart. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, cameras flashing every time Eleanor arrived in her chauffeur-driven car or Scott strutted in with his expensive suits. Me. I walked in with a folder and Angela at my side. Every day was a battle, but piece by piece, the facade Eleanor had built began to crack. A handwriting expert testified that Richard's signature on the September will was shaky, inconsistent with his usual hand. A financial analyst revealed transfers of large sums from Richard's accounts to Scott's just days before his death. Funds Eleanor had authorized. Angela wove it all together like a tapestry of deceit. "This isn't just undue influence," she told the judge. "This is fraud. This is theft carried out under the guise of family loyalty." Eleanor glared daggers at me across the room, but her silence spoke louder than words. Outside the courthouse one afternoon, Scott cornered me in the parking lot. He grabbed my arm, his breath hot with anger. "You think you're winning," he hissed. "This isn't over. You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." I yanked my arm free, staring him down. "The only one who should regret anything is you. Your father deserved better than this circus you and your mother built on his grave." His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of something darker. But before he could say more, Angela appeared, her phone raised like a weapon. "Careful, Scott," she said coolly. "Threatening my client in public isn't the smartest move. Cameras are everywhere these days." Scott backed off, cursing under his breath. The final week of trial arrived. Tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Eleanor's team tried to regain ground, parading character witnesses who painted her as a devoted wife, and Scott as a responsible son. But the evidence was too heavy, the contradictions too glaring. I sat there, heart pounding, as Angela delivered her closing argument. "Richard Morgan's true voice is in that voicemail. His true intentions are in the March will. The September document is nothing but the product of manipulation, greed, and betrayal. This court has the power to restore what was stolen, not just from Daniel, but from Richard's legacy itself." When she finished, the courtroom fell silent. The judge announced he would deliberate and deliver his decision in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days of waiting, knowing everything hung in the balance. But as I walked out of that courthouse, past the flashing cameras and the murmurs of onlookers, I realized something. No matter what the judge decided, Eleanor and Scott had already lost something they could never reclaim. Their secrets were exposed. Their respectability shattered. And I wasn't done yet. 2 weeks. 14 days of silence that stretched like an eternity. I woke up every morning thinking about that voicemail, about Richard's frail voice asking me to protect his legacy. I carried it with me to work, to bed, to the lonely dinners I ate while Claire locked herself away in the guest room. The house felt colder by the day, like the walls themselves were preparing for the verdict. Angela called me every other day, calm and steady. "We did everything we could. Trust the evidence. Trust the process." But trust wasn't easy. Eleanor had influence, friends in high places, and money to burn. People like her rarely lost. The morning of the decision, the courthouse was a zoo. Reporters jostled for position on the steps, microphones shoved into anyone who looked remotely connected to the case. Flashes burst in my face as I pushed through with Angela. "Daniel, do you expect to win today? Do you feel guilty for dragging your family through this? Is it true you pressured Richard in his final months?" I kept my head down. I wasn't here for headlines. I was here for justice. Eleanor arrived moments later, draped in black like a widow carved from marble. Scott walked beside her, sunglasses shielding his eyes, jaw tight with anger. They didn't look at me, but I felt the weight of their hatred like heat on the back of my neck. Inside, the air was thick. The judge entered, expression unreadable, and everyone rose. My palms were slick, my chest tight. This was it. The judge began slowly, carefully, laying out the facts like stones in a foundation. He acknowledged Richard's March will as valid. He noted the suspicious circumstances surrounding the September draft, the medication levels, the witness testimonies, the financial irregularities. He cited Linda's credibility, the handwriting expert's report, the email evidence, and finally, Richard's voicemail. When he played it again, the courtroom fell into that same heavy silence. I watched Eleanor's jaw clench, Scott's fists tighten. Then the words I had been waiting for. This court finds the September will invalid due to undue influence and lack of capacity. The March will stands as the decedent's true last testament. The gavel struck. It was over. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, the shuffle of reporters bolting for the doors to file their stories. Angela placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and grounding. "You won," she whispered. But it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Eleanor rose slowly, her mask cracking for the first time. Her eyes burned as they locked onto mine. She leaned in just enough for me to hear her hissed words. "This isn't the end. You'll regret crossing me." Scott shoved past me, muttering curses, his face twisted with rage. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The gavel had already spoken louder than anything I could say. Life after the verdict was strange. The media storm swirled for weeks, headlines painting me as the loyal friend, Eleanor as the manipulative widow, Scott as the greedy son. They hated me for it, of course. But for once, the truth was louder than their lies. I inherited what Richard had left me, a controlling share of the family company, the house he'd always promised would be mine, and enough financial stability to live without fear. But with the inheritance came whispers, suspicions, even resentment. Old business partners treated me differently, some with respect, others with envy. I wasn't just Daniel anymore. I was the man who took down Eleanor Morgan. And at home, things were worse. Claire moved out 2 weeks after the ruling. No fight, no explanation, just a suitcase rolling across the floor and the sound of the front door closing behind her. She left a note. "I can't choose between my husband and my mother. So I won't. Goodbye." I sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at those words until the ink blurred through my tears. Victory had come with a cost. But revenge has a way of writing itself in chapters you don't plan. Months later, news broke that Eleanor and Scott were under investigation. The emails Angela had unearthed had caught the attention of financial regulators. Those transfers from Richard's accounts weren't just suspicious, they were illegal. Embezzlement, fraud, tax evasion. I watched from a distance as the empire Eleanor had clung to crumbled piece by piece. Properties seized. Accounts frozen. Invitations to galas and charity boards revoked. Scott was arrested first, dragged from his penthouse in handcuffs, his smirk finally gone. Eleanor followed weeks later. Her name splashed across headlines she couldn't control this time. It wasn't me who destroyed them in the end. It was their own greed, their own lies. I had simply pulled the first thread, and they unraveled themselves. One night, months after the dust had settled, I found myself back in Richard's study. The house was mine now, but it didn't feel like home. His leather chair still smelled faintly of tobacco and old books. The shelves were lined with his collection of history volumes, spines cracked from use. I sat there, in the dim lamplight, and played the voicemail again. His voice was weak, but it carried something stronger than any verdict or fortune. "Don't let them undo what I wanted. Promise me." "I kept my promise, old man," I whispered. "They can't touch you anymore." For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. But peace is a fragile thing. Because sometimes, late at night, I still hear Eleanor's words in the back of my mind. This isn't the end. And I know she meant it. Some people fight with money. Some with lies. Some with courts and contracts. But Eleanor Morgan? She was the kind who fought with survival itself. And if she ever found a way back into the light, I'd be waiting. Because this war between us wasn't finished. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.